From the world of politics to the world of business, this is Balance of Power. Live from Washington, D.C.
From Bloomberg's Washington, D.C. studios to our TV and radio audiences worldwide, welcome to Balance of Power. I'm Joe Matthew. Vice President Kamala Harris unveiling new details on her economic plans today, calling for a federal ban on price gouging, assistance for new home buyers, and tax cuts for the middle class. We're joined by Democratic Congressman Wiley Nickel, who greeted Harris in his home state today of North Carolina. All this ahead of the Democratic National Convention. We'll have a live report from Chicago straight ahead as organizers brace for tens of thousands of protesters next week. And we'll talk as well with economist Tiffany Wilding from Pimco, as consumer sentiment rises for the first time in 5 months, thanks in part to Joe Biden dropping out of the presidential race. Thanks for joining us on this Friday edition of Balance of Power on Bloomberg TV and radio, as we deal with the intersection today of politics and the economy. Speaking in battleground North Carolina this afternoon, Vice President Kamala Harris outlining her economic plans for the middle class in a speech in Raleigh.
As president, I will be laser focused on creating opportunities for the middle class that advance their economic security, stability, and dignity. Together, we will build what I call an opportunity economy.
That's where we begin with Bloomberg Government's Kate Ackley and Bloomberg's Kate Davidson with us at the table this evening. It's great to see both of you. Thank you for being here. Kate, this is an interesting moment for Kamala Harris, trying to balance inspiring rhetoric with details. We did get some details today: an expanded child tax credit, homeowner assistance, this plan for $25,000 in down payment support, as she's calling it, along with price controls on things like groceries. The devil's in the details, of course. How do you pay for all this?
Right, the pay fors. That's always, whenever we're talking about tax legislation or anything like that, it's always the pay fors.
Mm-hmm. Are there any?
I saw some positive comments from liberal groups saying, this is great. And then what about more taxes on the rich? Like trying to prod her a little bit farther on that. So I think we might see some more, advocacy along those lines.
That's the answer from Democrats, though, right? Soak the rich so we can pay for these programs. Kate, it's interesting. $25,000 for more than 1 million first-time home buyers. That's a lot of taxes on rich people. Does she need to talk about controlling government spending? Because that was not part of the address today, was it?
No, I mean, I don't know if she does, Joe, right? That's been the big question over the past number of years. Is this something that voters really care about? I mean, it seems like based on the speech today and what the vice president outlined and how, frankly, how little she talked about how she would pay for it, I think she's betting that voters are just a lot more interested in hearing about what the proposals would be to help them, right? And worrying about how much it would cost later on. But, to their credit, I think, as Kate was saying, I mean, Democrats have talked about taxes on the wealthy as a way to pay for these programs. I mean, if we look at the proposals on the Republican side for reducing taxes, there's not a lot of detail either from them on how they would offset that reduced revenue. So no one really talking about debt
on either side.
On either side, exactly.
Of the aisle, we should note. No pay fors in Donald Trump's economic speech, other than grow our way out of it, which is not always the easiest thing to do. It's a lot easier to say. The idea of a federal ban on price gouging, Kate, would that require a Democratic sweep of the House and Senate?
If it were to be enacted, if it were to be legislation.
Talk about this, but how do you do it?
And we've already seen Republicans Republican organizations put out statements and say things panning this idea, saying that this is just more of the same types of policies that led to the high inflation of the past couple of years. House Speaker Mike Johnson, obviously a Republican, said that this was kind of just a more radical version of some of the what he called the Biden-Harris policies, now the Harris-Walz policies, being more radical, and that would lead to another round of high inflation.
Sounds like it's safe to say, and we don't have all the details on both candidates' plans, but both would be potentially adding to the deficit and therefore inflationary. Is that safe to say?
I think it's too early to say. I mean, if the Harris campaign, if Kamala Harris wins and they put forward a plan for how to pay for all these things, I mean, they could offset those costs. Sure. But really, it also comes down to, of course, who has control of the Senate and the House, what happens in Congress. Exactly. I mean, we saw even when Democrats were in control, they couldn't get everyone in their party or enough people in the Senate to agree to these kinds of big sweeping proposals or for tax increases, and that sort of forced President Biden to dial back on his plan. So we could see some of that later, too. There's no guarantee that all of this would be enacted.
Far from. Yeah. This was about vision, I think, right? Sure. More than details. But I'll tell you what, when you drill down on some of the details today and then look at the data we got this morning, it's an interesting situation with consumer sentiment rising for the first time in 5 months. But, Kate, part of the reason why, as we learned, was Joe Biden's decision to drop out of the race. What do you make of that?
Well, I guess, for him, it's probably doesn't sound like good news.
I wouldn't love to hear that about myself, no. The nation's feeling more optimistic without you.
Right.
You can't deny it, though. When you look at the curve here, people started feeling better right around the time he left the race.
There's definitely been a surge of enthusiasm among Democratic voters and people who are aligned with the Democratic Party. I mean, we've seen all kinds of enthusiasm and more people wanting to go to the convention in the past few weeks. That people, I talked to somebody today that said, I've just made a last-minute decision to go, a D.C. lobbyist. Wow. So, even the lobbyists don't want to be left.
Oh God, what are we in for?
Left behind. So there is more enthusiasm, and it may be some of that, seeing a little bit more optimism from people who are aligned with Democrats.
Well, God knows it'll be a sea of humanity next week. But we had numbers on housing today as well, Kate. The lowest housing construction since May of 2020. I don't know if you remember May of 2020, but that was not a good time for the housing market. So does this homeowner assistance plan or some of the proposals she has to increase construction, did they ring true when you look at the reality in this market?
Yeah, I mean, I think clearly there seems to be agreement that there needs to be more done to address the housing supply issue, right? I mean, obviously affordability, which is what she's really targeting, seems to be with this subsidy, is important. But if there are not enough homes to buy, if there's not enough supply, that's what's pushing up prices. I mean, that's a problem that at one point or another needs to be addressed. And the Biden administration has tried to sort of take some smaller steps to figure this out, but definitely. It's not surprising, especially where rates are as well, that we're starting to see that taking more and more of a bite out of the housing market.
Well, it's interesting. You guys remember 2007, the subprime mortgage crisis. A lot of people were pushed into homes, encouraged to buy homes for the first time, who probably shouldn't have been owning homes. When you're offering $25,000 to more than 1 million first-time home buyers, don't you risk creating another scenario like that?
Well, what Republicans are saying, and some economists are saying, is that it just means everybody put up add $25,000 to the value of your home. That it's just going to sort of, which, that could be good or bad, depending on where you sit.
Yeah.
But
not if you're buying one.
Her proposal also kind of put Wall Street on notice. She said, you wanted to basically ban the big, big Wall Street investors come in and buy a big chunk of housing and then boost the prices. So there are some other things in there, kind of a populist theme that we've seen also on the Republican side a little bit. But, we're seeing that as a response to some of these difficulties in the home sales.
She talked about cost of a loaf of bread up 50%, ground beef up 50%. This is not a George H.W. Bush with the gallon of milk here. But she also talked about her time as AG in California. Now, this is interesting. 4 years ago, that was held against her politically. Now she's running on it and told the crowd today, I will go after the bad actors. I will work to pass the first federal ban on price gouging on food. She said, as AG in California, I went after companies that illegally increased prices, and I won more than $1 billion for consumers. Is that a winning line?
Well, I think that she's betting that voters, I guess, want to hear more tough talk on what is going to be done about prices. Of course, we know, Joe, prices are unlikely to come down to actually fall. That would be deflation. What we're seeing right now is disinflation. And broadly speaking, I mean, you don't see, there's a reason why we're not paying, the same price for a loaf of bread that we did in 1980. I mean, there is inflation. It ticks up a little bit every year. And we saw it soar. It's come back down. And I think that the Biden administration had been touting that progress, but it just clearly was not ringing true for a lot of voters. And so I think Harris is shifting a little bit. She's kind of going back to or leaning into a message that, yes, you know, I see you and I hear that you're still struggling, and I'm going to do more about it.
Well, there's a lot more where this came from. We could argue this was the appetizer today. Vice President Harris saying in the weeks to come, I will have more details about the opportunity economy, and that will, of course, bring us to Chicago, where we're going to be next week. Bloomberg's Ackley, Kate Davidson, the Kates on a Friday. Thank you so much for the reporting and the analysis. Coming up, Vice President Harris choosing North Carolina once again as the location for her economic address today. She did so for a reason. Democratic Congressman Wiley Nickel will be with us after the break with the importance of the Tar Heel state in this election. It's coming up next on Balance of Power, Bloomberg TV and radio.
We all know that prices went up during the pandemic when the supply chains shut down and failed. But our supply chains have now improved, and prices are still too high.
Vice President Harris outlining her economic plans in a speech today in Raleigh, North Carolina, that you saw and heard live here on Bloomberg. In our most recent Bloomberg Morning Consult poll, just a couple weeks back, 33% of registered voters in that state said the economy is the single most important issue for their vote this election. And of course, North Carolina, one of 7 swing states we're following that will likely choose the next president of the United States. And we're joined now by Congressman Wiley Nickel. The Democrat from North Carolina was on the tarmac today when Kamala Harris touched down and helped to welcome her to the state. Congressman, it's great to see you. As always, welcome back to Bloomberg TV and radio. Why should the people of North Carolina trust Kamala Harris more than Donald Trump when it comes to the economy?
Well, it's great to be with you, Joe. We had a great visit from Vice President Harris today in the great state of North Carolina. This was her 16th visit to North Carolina as vice president. And that's the number one issue in every election is always the economy. We need someone who's going to fight for working families. And we got to hear specific policy proposals about how she's going to bring down the high cost of housing that hits so many North Carolinians so incredibly hard. I especially was glad to hear her talk about, the work I've done on the Congressional Dads Caucus to help families. She mentioned she wants to do a lot more for the child tax credit, $6,000 per family. That's a big deal for working families. So, we got to hear what is very refreshing, a speech just focused on policy. She could have had a giant rally with a ton of people, but she wanted to talk about the issues that matter for folks here, and that's housing and child care and the issues that matters to families.
Well, she called you out at the beginning of her speech, Congressman, and I wonder how important your House of Representatives, not to mention the Senate next door, is going to be when it comes to this plan. How much of this plan rides on a Democratic sweep in November?
Well, I'm certainly hopeful we're going to have that, but I think after my hope is when we get Donald Trump out of the equation, we're going to be able to finally sit down and work together in a bipartisan way on so many issues that have just been put on the back burner. This Congress, we're on track to be one of the least productive Congresses in our nation's history. We need to get things done for the American people. That means immigration reform, which she said she's willing to sign, the most conservative immigration bill that Democrats have ever put forward and been willing to sign on to. That's a big deal for our country. So I'm hopeful that we can finally signal with Kamala Harris that we want to work towards the center and avoid, the extremism that far too often dominates the political discourse.
Our viewers on Bloomberg TV and on YouTube, Congressman, were just looking at video of you on the tarmac greeting Kamala Harris. You guys had some words when she arrived in North Carolina. What did she tell you?
Well, I just had her husband, Doug Emhoff, come to my house for a fundraiser a few weeks ago. And I was also talking about the Zoom we did with Mark Cuban and Chuck Schumer, Crypto for Harris, telling her about the great groups that we had, the great speakers and the good momentum we had on that issue. So, she knew about the Zoom. She knew about it and had great stuff to say about the work we're doing to help support her.
Yeah, the crypto for Harris call. This is just about a week ago, 6 days ago, had quite the turnout, Congressman. Not just Chuck Schumer, Mark Cuban, Anthony Scaramucci was there. I want you to listen to what Donald Trump said about crypto in a news conference recently when he was asked about this. You know, he's pledging to be the most friendly, the pro-crypto president in American history. And here's how he says he'll get to it.
On day one, I will fire Gary Gensler. I will appoint a new SEC chairman who believes America should build the future, not block the future. Upon taking office, I will immediately appoint a Bitcoin and crypto presidential advisory council.
That was at the big Bitcoin conference in Nashville. Congressman, I think you were there speaking to some of the folks who were in the room. The crypto bros seem to be embracing Donald Trump on this, and they're taking him at his word whether or not he's actually capable of firing Gary Gensler. What will Kamala Harris do for the crypto business and for investors?
Well, you know, it's one of the issues where I've been pushing for a thoughtful reset on the issue. She's running for president in her own right. She's going to have her own policy agenda and ideas. Today, she put forth a ton of very specific proposals on housing and the economy. So we're making the case for why a reset is important. But, you know, we had this Zoom with Chuck Schumer and Mark Cuban, very recently. And Chuck Schumer put out a very strong policy statement on the work he wants to get done to help protect consumers and keep innovation here in the United States. And we're talking about crypto and the future of Web3. So I think that's a very important step, and we've had a ton of engagement with the new Harris campaign on this issue. So we're hoping that we're going to get a good set of policy statements from them and a reset on this issue. And you're right about Donald Trump. I spoke just a few hours before him in Nashville on this issue, making the Democratic case for crypto and why we need to keep working on this in a bipartisan way. Trump, of course, wants to politicize the issue, but I think it's important, as you saw those clips of him, to remind folks that he did absolutely nothing on the issue for 4 years when he was president, and just even after he left the White House, he said it was a scam. So I don't take much of what Donald Trump says to heart, and I don't think he's very serious on this stuff. But he knows that Gary Gensler has been a really bad SEC chair. I've certainly been one of the first to say that his policy of regulation by enforcement is not serving the Biden administration's interests. But he's not the only voice in the room. So we're optimistic we're going to get a fresh new approach from Vice President Harris in the coming days.
Well, it wasn't just the crypto for Harris call. I also saw you on the Deadheads for Harris call a couple of days later. It wasn't just you, Congressman. I saw Senator Pat Leahy. Of course, any Vermont native has to be a deadhead. But is this for real? What is the spirit of Jerry Garcia going to do to get Kamala Harris elected?
It was a wonderful call. We had great live music. It's about the Grateful Dead music is about bringing people together. That's the message we need a lot more of in the U.S. Congress, certainly in this presidential election. And it's one of unity and not division. So that for me was one of the big things that group was about. Why I love the Dead so much. Proud to be a Deadhead for Harris.
Meet you at Franklin's Tower. Well, I guess I'll see you in Chicago first. Congressman Wiley Nickel. Thanks for coming back. Safe travels getting to the convention, and we'll see you there. Coming up on Bloomberg, a live preview of what we should expect from protests, police presence, the party politics at the DNC. We're going to bring you to Chicago for a preview next. Bloomberg's Tyler Kendall's already there and with us on Balance of Power on Bloomberg TV and radio. This is Balance of Power on Bloomberg TV and radio. I'm Joe Matthew in Washington. Thanks for joining us on this Friday. Precautions to keep attendees safe at the Democratic National Convention are already well underway. Bloomberg's Tyler Kendall traveled ahead of our team to get a sense of what's going on the ground and joins us now from Chicago with more. Tyler, I know this is going to be very similar in a lot of ways to what we saw in Milwaukee, but tens of thousands of protesters, pro-Palestinian protesters, are expected this time in Chicago. What are you seeing on the ground?
Yeah, hey, Joe. So you can see the United Center right behind my shoulder. That's where the Democratic National Convention will kick off on Monday. I had the chance to walk around the arena earlier today, and I saw hundreds of law enforcement personnel and also Secret Service agents doing a walkthrough. Also, those big security barricades that we saw at the RNC starting to go up around the perimeter, because the DNC says that they're expecting 50,000 people to flock to the city of Chicago over the course of the week for this convention. Now, for the Chicago Police Department's part, they say that they're allocating 2,500 law enforcement officials to the arena and also the surrounding perimeter, because as you mentioned, one of the themes that we're going to be watching for is how protests are playing out here in Chicago. I will note that earlier this week, a federal judge in Chicago actually dealt protesters a blow who wanted to change the current protest route. They're arguing that they're not getting close enough to the convention center. Right now, the route takes them about 2 blocks away from the United Center. They say that that violates their First Amendment right. However, the federal judge didn't agree, instead going with the city's current plan, saying that that is the best way to keep everybody from delegates to protesters safe. But Joe, just quickly, we would be remiss if we didn't mention the enthusiasm from the protesters, but we're also looking for the enthusiasm from those that are coming to Chicago. I would point you to our most recent Bloomberg News Morning Consult poll, which found that young voters are having big enthusiasm ahead of the Democratic National Convention. Our polling finds that 54% of voters ages 18 to 34 in some key battleground states say that they're now more likely to vote that President Biden is no longer on the ticket. It's pretty remarkable to think, Joe, that just weeks ago, this was supposed to be his convention.
Yeah, this whole thing is pretty remarkable, Tyler, and the schedule's coming together pretty effectively. It looks like we know Joe Biden's going to speak on Monday. It looks like Wednesday's getting filled out a bit more. Nancy Pelosi has been added to the list. What are the highlights we expect during this week in Chicago?
Right, definitely. We're all going to be watching for President Biden's speech on Monday night and how he threads the needle between party unity and also, cementing his legacy moving forward. Any perhaps policy proposals that might come out that might not have been as politically feasible when he was still on the top of the ticket. And now, while everybody is talking about who will be here, I'm particularly focused on who will not be here. We know that Senator Sherrod Brown, a vulnerable Democrat in Ohio, as well as Senator Jon Tester, won't be here either. Joe.
Yeah, it's going to be interesting as well to see who shows up as much as who doesn't. Tyler, Kendall reporting from Bloomberg in Chicago. We'll have a lot more ahead on Bloomberg TV and radio.
I will work to pass the first ever federal ban on price gauging on food. I'll lower the cost of insulin and prescription drugs for everyone with your support, not only our seniors. I will work as president with states like here in North Carolina to cancel medical debt for more and more millions. By the end of my first term, we will end America's housing shortage by building 3 million new homes and rentals that are affordable for the middle class.
Vice President Kamala Harris earlier today at an event in Raleigh, North Carolina, in which she proposed sweeping new federal subsidies for parents, home buyers, and Americans with low incomes, not to mention first-time home buyers. Joining us to discuss is Pimco economist Tiffany Wilding. Tiffany, it's great to see you back on Bloomberg. Thanks for joining us. I'm sure you were not the audience for this speech today. Kamala Harris was not speaking to economists who have a sense of what this will all cost and what the long-term impact will be. She's talking about lowering prices, though. And it strikes me that Kamala Harris and Donald Trump have yet to tell us how they're going to pay for any of their proposals, which would therefore potentially be inflationary in themselves. How do you see it?
Yeah, I mean, really, that's a great summary of it. I mean, clearly, just from a political perspective, she is really taking aim at the fact that consumers all over the income spectrum, but of course, the lower to middle income has been most impacted by this, the rising and elevated cost of living that's resulted post-pandemic. She's very focused, obviously, on housing, dealing with the high cost of living in housing, with more affordable housing subsidies and things like that, taking a look at stopping price gouging, and obviously helping families with a more elevated child tax credit than what we saw, obviously than what we saw in the Tax Cuts and Jobs Act from Trump, but then also more elevated child tax credits than the extended tax credits that we saw in the pandemic. So you're right. All of this will have a cost, and she had very few details around how she would fund these types of programs.
Interesting. She did say that she would provide more details as time went on. I'm not sure that Donald Trump plans to do the same. But I spoke earlier today with the campaign's senior economic advisor, Gene Sperling. He's gone from the White House to the campaign, and he talked about these proposals. Let's listen to what he said and have you respond.
I'll be honest, she is announcing more things that go after price gouging and price fixing among corporate landlords and in the food area than President Biden has. He's taken steps, but I think you see that she is not really swerving away, but she is putting her own stamp, and often it means going further and a little tougher.
A little bit tougher here. Do you see sunlight between Kamala Harris and Joe Biden when it comes to their approach to the economy?
Yeah, well, so, I mean, I think that certainly Gene Sperling is right, that a lot of the Harris policies that she talked about today are an extension of what the Biden administration has tried to do. Obviously, antitrust measures, which increase competition in various sectors, has been a really key piece as well of the Biden administration policies. If you get increased competition within markets, you have more players in those markets, it tends to make pricing more fair, and you don't have one or two big corporations that are setting higher prices for all consumers. And that is certainly the case in many rental markets. She mentioned, obviously, the meat packing industry for food. So certainly these types of policies that make markets more efficient, they are very good policies. I think most economists would agree with them. Obviously, she's also talking about various subsidies, though, as well. Yes. Those would be a little bit more costly, and I think there's more questions around how she could implement those.
I want to ask you about the plan for homeowner assistance. You give $25,000 to more than 1 million first-time home buyers. Is this what they're calling down payment support? What would happen to the housing market? Would it simply raise prices by $25,000 or bring us back to 2007 where some people are in homes that they probably shouldn't own?
Yeah, I mean, there certainly could, I think, so it sounds like from her proposals, that there would be income limits on this type of thing. So for lower income, folks, they could get, some increased subsidies to buy their first homes. So yes, all else equal, this should raise the price of homes. And economists will tell you this will raise the price of housing for everybody. And obviously, depending on how this is structured, it will, it will increase deficits. We talked a lot about this, but there's a really big question around the, quote, pay-fors of all of this. The Biden administration previously has talked about increasing the corporate tax rate, for example. Both Biden and I think Harris has also talked about not raising taxes for anyone or any families that make under $400,000 a year. So that just means that you raise the burden on corporates and others. And so you have to take that into account when you're thinking about these types of policies.
I don't mean to oversimplify this, Tiffany, but I will for the sake of this question. What's more inflationary, the package of proposals you saw today from Kamala Harris or making the Trump tax cuts permanent without paying for them?
Yeah, So we, the CBO and others have estimated that the full extension of Trump tax cuts over the next 10 years could cost $4 to $4.5 trillion. Some of the proposals that Kamala Harris today, all else equal, even go further in terms of expenses than those Trump tax cuts. So it could be more than that. Ultimately, over time, that should raise interest rates, would cost the government even more money in terms of interest costs. And I think just taking a step back, this is coming at a time when, the CBO is already projecting U.S. debt to really reach unprecedented levels. So we're, potentially nearing 200% of GDP debt by 2050, the CBO projects. So the bottom line is that, either Harris or Trump, in either presidency, the deficit is probably going to be the biggest loser here. And eventually, some policymakers down the road will have to write this course, but it doesn't seem like either candidate now is willing to think about that.
Wow, it's amazing how little we've learned over the last 4 to 8 years, I guess, with trillions added to the deficit here. I'm asking you questions. Tiffany, that's my job. What's your big question? What's the market's big question about these two candidates that has yet to be answered when it comes to the economy?
Well, I do feel like, some of the proposals, we talked a lot about Harris's discussion today, but, obviously the Trump proposals could also have a meaningful impact on the economy and the outlook going forward. The types of tariffs will also raise costs for many Americans that Trump is proposing. It could also really damage, the growth outlook as well. I think that the Trump administration or Trump officials are also talking about, full extension of his tax cuts and Jobs Act in 2025. So again here, I think the real question is, that probably most economists will have is what kind of sort of fiscal sustainability types of measures, are we ever going to think about, obviously, and what are some of maybe the market related triggers that will cause Washington, to start to care about federal government deficits a bit more again.
Yeah, what a thought. Kamala Harris today referring to the tariffs Trump has proposed as a national sales tax. Interesting rhetoric as we spend some time today with Pimco's Tiffany Wilding. Tiffany, I'm glad you could join us. I really appreciate the insights here on Bloomberg TV and radio. Coming up, more on the presidential candidates' economic plans. We go to both sides of the aisle here with our political panel next. This is Balance of Power, Bloomberg TV and radio. This is Balance of Power on Bloomberg TV and radio. Thanks for joining us. The U.S. economy front and center for former President Trump and for Vice President Kamala Harris this week. The two big economic speeches amid continued signs that the U.S. is achieving a soft landing. Joining us now, our political panel. They're back. Jeannie Shanzano, political science professor at Iona University, senior democracy fellow at the Center for the Study of the Presidency and Congress. And Rick Davis, partner at Stone Court Capital, Republican strategist, of course, Bloomberg Politics contributors. Great to see you both here. Jeannie, I'll start with you because we just heard most recently from Kamala Harris and her plans for the economy. She does have one thing, it seems, in common with Donald Trump. They have yet to tell us how they're going to pay for their economic proposals. Does she need to do that before the election?
Absolutely. They both do. I mean, I can talk about this from a political perspective, but from a common sense economic perspective, it is a pox on both of their houses. I mean, they are putting forward plans. And understandably, maybe a speech in your first outing, maybe a press conference at your golf course isn't the place to say how you're going to pay for this. But somebody somewhere has got to say how you're going to afford this. I mean, the problem, I think, is not about Kamala Harris or Donald Trump. It is because we as Americans and our system incentivizes them to go out and make promises, and never demands that they explain how we're going to pay for any of this. So she did this today, $25,000 here, $6,000 there. He's doing it, and nobody's at all concerned about how we're going to pay for it. And that's a big problem for all of us as we look down the road.
One thing she did not have either today was props. Donald Trump showed up yesterday with on a grocery store aisle as he was talking at Bedminster about this. I don't know if the props did much today, but is Kamala Harris resonating? She was in North Carolina with the audience she needs to connect with here, worried about high prices?
Yes and no. I mean, the CPI in July was good, right? And in fact, the props that Trump used, obviously he was ill-informed because cereal prices went way down. And here he is standing there with Cheerios. So if anybody actually thought about it, they'd say, hey, wait a minute, that was one of the highlights of the CPI in July. Okay. Why are you talking about Cheerios? Look, I mean, it's what Jeannie said. She has a bag full of goodies. The child tax credit expansion. Oh, no, forget 2,000, forget 3,000. We're going to go 6,000, for each child. And that's all great stuff. Yeah. Nobody argues that the child tax credit isn't a good program. Mm-hmm. But how do you afford $1.2 trillion over the next 10 years? Right. And so I think at some point voters are going to get a little fatigued, and they're going to realize that all this government spending is how we got into inflation to begin with. And so why do we think that that's not going to be inflationary? We've spent all this time in Milwaukee talking about the Trump plan and all these tariffs and getting rid of and keeping his tax cuts permanent are going to be inflationary. Now we just heard from Kamala Harris, and she didn't change the topic at all.
And Tiffany Wilding at Pimco just made it pretty clear to us, Jeannie, that both candidates' proposals would be inflationary. What do you make of giving $25,000 to 1 million first-time home buyers? The reaction is going to be just the same as it was to forgiving student loan debt, won't it?
It very well could be. I am so sensitive to young people who are looking to buy their first home. It is so terribly difficult. I'm in the New York market. You see it across the country. It is incredibly expensive. So she is right to talk about housing prices. But the fact is, if you're going to offer these plans, you have to pay for this. And yes, we're hearing corporate taxes. Yes, we're hearing taxes on the super wealthy. We're also hearing, and you just talked about this, about how much all of this is potentially going to add to the debt and deficit. Some debt and deficit is fine, but we need a responsible budgeting system in this country out of Washington, D.C. And you don't hear that from either one of these parties at this point, again, because it's not something that sends people running to the polls. So until we as voters demand it, we're going to get more of the same. Politically, she was great today. Economically, it's hard to give her an A+.
Well, the rhetoric has been something, and Donald Trump made it pretty clear yesterday. He, in fact, said that he does not have any respect for Kamala Harris. He doesn't respect her intelligence. I'm not sure she respects his, but there have been questions about Donald Trump's approach here when it comes to talk like this, and Republican vice presidential candidate J.D. Vance got into this earlier. His take on Donald Trump at an event in Milwaukee.
I don't think the president needs to pivot, and if I told him that, I can guess what he'd say. I think that the reason that President Trump has been so successful connecting with Americans is even when they disagree with something that he might say, they know that he just is who he is. I think the unscripted nature of President Trump is one of the reasons why his campaign gives a pretty good insight into the kind of president that he's going to be.
Rick, there's got to be some truth to that, the unscripted nature of Donald Trump. That's how he came out of nowhere, right, in 2016. The insults are a different part of this, though, and he's saying that Americans deserve a leader who can offend them. Is that true?
No, that's not true. And in fact, if you just go to the polling, it's pretty clear that the big negative associated with Donald Trump is the chaos that he brings to the presidency. If he could figure out a way to have that kind of conversation with the American public that is attractive, that J.D. Vance was just talking about, without all the nasty phrases and insults and grievances and these kinds of things, I think the American public would welcome that. But the trade isn't a fair trade. And I think we saw in 2020, they weren't willing to spend that capital to have him back in there and be exhausted by these kinds of outbursts. So until at which point in time they decide they're going to change Donald Trump, I think they're going to have to live with what they've got. And he's going to have to realize that the public isn't shopping for that this cycle.
Yeah, yet somehow we are here again. Rick and Jeannie will stay with us. Coming up, we count down to the Democratic National Convention. We're all piling into the jet to Chicago this weekend, and our panel will be back with us next on Balance of Power on Bloomberg TV and radio.
So I called you,
I was hoping
Tim.
maybe we wouldn't have to.
I called you, Tim.
Yes.
You didn't answer, Tim.
I know.
What happened?
The most important call of my life. It popped up, and we didn't recognize the caller ID, and it went to voicemail.
Hi, this is Tim. I'm not able to answer. There you go. Thank you.
Hey, Tim, it's Kamala. I really want to talk to you.
You screening the boss's call? Pretty fun video there of Kamala Harris recounting, as you just saw, the moment in which she tried to dial up Tim Walz, let him know he would be the running mate. And he didn't answer the phone. She got voicemail. The Democratic National Convention kicks off next week in Chicago. They will both be there, and so will we, including Jeannie Sheehan Zaino and Rick Davis. Our political panel is back with us here on the Friday edition of Balance of Power as we get ready for the DNC having survived the RNC. Jeannie, this is a big day for Joe Biden on Monday. And then we switch gears, it looks like, based on the program, and look to the future. What's going to be the most important speech here, if not Kamala Harris herself? Tim Walz has an important moment in front of the delegates as well. We're going to see Barack Obama, Bill Clinton, the Mount Rushmore of Democratic politics.
That's right. Of course, Joe, if you ask me that, if Beyonce does show up, I'm going to have to go with Beyonce.
That's your moment.
All of them. And Julia Louis-Dreyfus, I know she's going to be there. Love Veep, so I'd have to go with her. But beyond that, I will say, obviously, it's Kamala Harris, and Tim Walz. I mean, they're going to be the stars of the week. It's going to be an important moment, obviously, for Joe Biden handing over the baton. And the fact that you have, Obama, Clinton, and of course Carter's grandson is going to be there. So it's going to be a moment for the Democratic Party to celebrate and to welcome in a new generation of leaders, for sure.
Well, we're going to be joined by, as well as reported at least, tens of thousands of pro-Palestinian protesters. Rick, security is going to be another big story at this convention, particularly after the attempted assassination of Donald Trump just weeks ago.
Yeah, I think it's a confluence of events, right? I mean, we now realize just how violent the political system has gotten to this point. And you have a democratic movement around the Palestinian Gaza situation that is just gearing up anyway for the college season. And I think a lot of the organizers there think the kickoff to that is a big protest in Chicago around the convention. So there's no question that Chicago is braced for it. They know it's coming. They've been forewarned. I think the Secret Service probably is on full alert after the debacle that happened with Donald Trump. So I just hope that the city isn't shut down. It's such a vibrant, fun city to be in. And, of course, they need security, but we're going there to see a show. We want to see the show. And I hope it doesn't make it so sort of desolate that it's not as interesting.
And it's easy to shut a city down for these things, of course. Jeannie, how concerned are you about protesters interrupting the message at this convention? Because Rick is right. When you go back to Iona University in September, you're not going to be able to hide from it.
No, that's absolutely right. And I think this is a big test, obviously, for the city of Chicago, for the DNC. We've all talked about the fact there's a history going back to 1968 of Democratic conventions in Chicago. They really need to hope that the protests stay peaceful. They stay outside of the center where they are holding the convention, and that there's no massive disruptions. It's a test of their ability to mitigate and manage this risk, and it's a test for Kamala Harris and her team. And we're obviously, the media from the world is descending on Chicago to watch this. So if you're going to protest, this is the time to do it, to get attention to this and many other causes that people on this side care about.
Well, the tone change ought to be undeniable. We ended night 4 in Milwaukee by watching Hulk Hogan rip his shirt off at the podium. Rick, would Beyonce, as Jeannie mentions, be the Democratic answer to that? What are we in for?
I'm not going to go a parallel with that.
I won't. This is not a wardrobe.
Just remember one thing. Taylor Swift's concert ends this weekend in London.
Oh, man.
And she's free.
She can make it.
End of the tour. Chicago, London, not a lot of logistics there. I mean, I'm for Beyonce being there, but the nuclear bomb of acts these days.
That would be the endorsement to end them all, right, Jeannie? Is she going to get on the private jet to Chicago?
Oh, my God. Rick Davis is a Swiftie. I am just spreading the news. I love it. And yes, but what better than Taylor Swift and Beyonce? You can't get much better. And to Rick's point, she has the time to make it.
Wait until Kaylee Lines finds out about this. Rick Davis, Jeannie Shanzano. Pack your bags. We'll meet you in Chicago. We've got a lot to talk about next week, and we thank you for joining us on Balance of Power. I hope you'll join us next week, starting Monday at the DNC in Chicago. I'm Joe Matthew in Washington. This is Bloomberg.